Hi friends, Klara and Maureen here.
We'd like to invite you to something called Fairy Tale Tea Hour. Yes, pajamas are required. This is non-negotiable. It's for the psyche.
We will sip a tea, tell a fairy tale, and then explore it through the Jungian lens.
Which is a fancy way of saying we ask slightly unhinged questions in a very calm voice.
Like, is the wolf really a shadow?
Or is the shadow my email box? I keep avoiding like it has teeth.
It's cozy, it's reflective, it's funny in that slightly uncomfortable way that still feels true.
You don't need to be an expert. You just need to be someone with pajamas that's willing to look inward and not run away.
Come and join us. Bring your psyche, your teacup, and your unread messages.
Well, hello, everyone. Got your tea?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our fairy tale tea time. Maureen, do you want to tell everyone real quick how this all started?
Right. Well, so sometimes when Klara and I talk, it's sometimes early in the morning for me, not so much for her, Wisconsin, Ohio. However, we were talking and I'm like, I can FaceTime, but I still got my jammies on. And she goes, me too. So she had her jammies on and I looked, and as we're talking about fairy tales, because I just happened to pick up this book and I opened it up to The Frog Prince, which is the story we're going to read tonight. And I just started talking about the Frog Prince, and we're going deep dive into Jungian theory. And then I noticed she had her Harry Potter pajamas on. She was drinking tea, and I thought, we're going to have to do a fairy tale tea time.
Yeah. So welcome, everybody. I would encourage you to sit back, relax, and let yourself be read to. We will play for you the fairy tale, The Frog Prince by Brothers Grimm. You ready, Maureen?
Of the Frog Prince. One fine evening, a young princess went into the wood and sat down by a cool spring of water. She had a golden ball in her hand, which was her favorite plaything, and she amused herself with tossing it into the air and catching it again as it fell. After a time, she threw it up so high that when she stretched out her hand to catch the ball, it bounded away and rolled upon the ground until at last it fell deep into the spring. The princess looked into the spring after her ball, but it was very deep, so deep that she could not see to the bottom of it. Then she began to lament her loss and said, "Alas, if I could only get my ball again, I would give all my fine clothes and jewels and everything that I have in the world." Whilst she was speaking, a frog put his head out of the water. The frog said, "I want not your pearls and your jewels and your fine clothes, but if you will love me and let me live with you and eat from your little golden plate and sleep upon your little bed, I will bring you your ball again." "Well, what nonsense," thought the princess. "This silly frog is talking. He can never get out of the well. However, he may be able to get my ball for me. So, with that, I will promise him what he says." So she said to the frog, "Well, if you will bring me my ball, I promise to do all required." Then the frog put his head down and dived deep under the water, and after a little while he came up again with the ball in his mouth and threw it on the ground. As soon as the young princess saw her ball, she ran to pick it up. She was so overjoyed to have it in her hand again that she never thought of the frog, but ran home with it as fast as she could. The frog called after her, "Stay, princess, and take me with you as you promised." But she did not stop to hear a word. The next day, just as the princess had sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise tapping, as if someone was coming up the marble staircase. And soon afterward, something knocked gently at the door and said, Open the door, my princess dear. Open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou hast said by the fountain, cool in the green shade. The princess ran to the door and opened it, and there she saw the frog, whom she had terribly quite forgotten. She was terribly frightened, and shutting the door as fast as she could, she came back to her seat. The king, her father, asked her what had frightened her. There's a nasty frog, she said, at the door, who lifted my ball out of the spring this morning. I promised him that if he should live with me here, thinking that he would never get out of the spring, but there he is at the door, and he wants to come in. While she was speaking, the frog knocked again at the door and said, Open the door, my princess dear. Open the door to thy true love here. And after, mind the words that thou hast said by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade. The king said, As you have made a promise, you must keep it. Go and let him in. And so she did. The frog hopped and came close to the table. Pray lift me upon the chair. And he said to the princess, Let me sit next to you. As soon as she had done this, the frog said, Put your plate close to me that I may eat out of it. And this is what she did. And then when he had eaten as much as he could, he said, Now I am tired. And the princess took him up into her hand and put him in the pillow of her own little bed, where he slept all night long. As soon as it was light, he jumped up and hopped downstairs and went out of the house. Now, thought the princess, he is gone. I shall be troubled with him no more. But she was mistaken, for the night came again, and she heard the same tapping at the door. When she opened the door, the frog came in, and he slept upon her pillow again. She was astonished to see that instead of the frog, now there was a handsome prince gazing upon her with the most beautiful eyes that were ever seen, and standing at the head of her bed, there he was. He told her that he had been enchanted by a malicious fairy who had changed him from the form of a prince into a frog, in which he was fated to remain until some princess should take him out of the spring and let him sleep upon her bed for 3 nights, of which she did. You, said the prince, have broken this cruel charm, and now I have nothing to wish for but that you should go with me into my father's kingdom, where I will marry you and love you for as long as you live. The young princess, you may be sure, was not long in giving her consent, and as they spoke, a splendid carriage drove up with 8 beautiful horses decked with plumes of feathers and golden harnesses, and behind rode the prince's servant, the faithful Henry, who had bewailed the misfortune of his dear master so long and bitterly that his heart had nigh burst. Then all is set out, full of joy, the prince's kingdom, where they arrived safely and lived happily great many years.
Great, thank you. How many of you do you know this fairy tale, The Frog Prince? You can just raise your hand. Okay. So we want to talk about fairy tales because fairy tales are often not just about well, they're not just stories for children. As you know, they survive centuries, if not millennia, even when there were no written word. It just survived because they were retold and retold over and over again. And so if you look at the fairy tale, you can look at it as as one psyche. And the fairy tale typically describes a process called initiation, that the princess or prince or hero or heroine are in some comfortable settings, and suddenly something happens and they are called on a quest. And so many tales, many stories have this storyline A hero heroine gets the call, they set themselves on a quest, they have to go through certain struggles, they have some trials, they have some helpers on the way. They have to overcome something in order to get to the treasure, get the princess, or break the spell. So that's why we are talking about a fairy tale today. So I would invite you to try to look at the tale, the story, as from the perspective that everything within the story belongs to one person. Even the frog, even the king, even the golden ball, everything is in one psyche of the princess. And then after that, what we will do, we will look at it from the perspective also of the prince. So we wanted to ask you about, because we want to keep this as flowy and open discussion.
Charles Perrault, probably 300 years ago, and then the Grimm's brothers, about 200 years ago, collected these stories, these fairy tales, and they were a bit racy. And so they sort of toned them down a little bit to make them more suitable for children. However, what I think Carl Jung discovered, along with Marie-Louise von Franz, a fairy tale expert, why are they really so popular and not even just for children, for adults? They do have a particular structure to them, and they're very generic. They are like ordinary people. Sometimes they have metaphors for spiritual growth, for the soul. They actually resonate. You can take one story like The Frog Prince, and you're going to find it in many different cultures, slightly different. Like in the one of the stories, the princess slams the frog against the wall. This one, it didn't happen, but there's some significance, some symbolic significance even to that. So what we're doing here, and some of the reasons why we're asking you these questions, is because there's a secret code in every fairy tale, and we want to crack the code. We want to be code crackers, because what that does is it shatters our perception, and we can look at it more symbolically. So if you're looking at like, what is the golden ball? What is the golden ball? Clara, what does a golden ball sort of represent then, maybe in the psyche, if you had to say something about that?
What resonated with you in that story? What do you think the golden ball represents to you? Why do you think it was so important at the beginning of the story that the princess loses her ball? Anybody wants to chime in? Well, I think Kathy wanted to say something. So I'll let Kathy take this one.
Well, I think anytime you've got gold, that's a rich, that, the central focus is on that, and it's a contained ball, and it's so precious, and she's carefree, and she's a child, and she's not, there's innocence, and she's just playing along in the woods. And also, I like the metaphor of, well, what is my gold? I mean, I know there's multiple layers to this, but so often, if we're looking at the shadow, I don't want to always look at the shadow. I'd like to have some gold moments. That's about all I have to say. I didn't have anything else.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Did it spark anything for anyone else?
Yeah, type it in the chat if you don't mind.
While Terry's going to be typing her perfect self. Yes, exactly. But Terry, you're absolutely right. The perfect self, right? And isn't it interesting? Like in fairy tales, there's typically something golden, something gold, and it's always precious. And it's so valuable to the princess that when she loses it, she, in a way, she's kind of embarked on a journey to retrieve it back. So in the Jungian psychology, the way Jungians look at any type of golden ball in dreams or in fairy tales, it would be the representation of the self with the capital S. meaning what Jung recognized was that we have two centers within the psyche. It would be the first one is the ego, the I, which is the small center. That's what you're aware of. And then the golden bowl, the self. And it is a organizing center that includes your emotions, your potentials, and your instincts. And typically when the symbol appears in fairy tales and dreams, it is because the self is asking for the ego to integrate qualities that the ego, the I, is not aware of, that are available to you. So in our case, she goes and she drops it in the well, and the frog hears her cries and weeps and all of that. And so he said that if you can promise me that I can dine with you, you will take care of me, and I can sleep with you, I will retrieve the ball. And Princess, she's kind of snobby. She's like, well, what this frog can really do to me, all I have to say is yes. So that's, if you look at it through, again, the Jungian lens, you can view the frog as a shadow, because she thinks that the frog is repulsive and it's slimy, and it's very, just like, she feels superior over the frog. This frog can never actually demand that would be dined at the king's table. This could never happen. So this is like the encounter in life with our shadow, with our primitive side and aspects of us, with our instincts. And so I wonder, have you had in your daily life? What is your frog? Have you had any encounter with a frog that you felt, this is not me. I'm not gonna even engage. Can you share any of your stories, if you had one? Okay, Maureen, I know that you recently had a frog encounter.
Oh my goodness, I did have a frog encounter. Um, in fact, this was just most recently. What had happened was I had created this beautiful Young at Heart Senior Prom fundraiser at my work, and it was like my big moment and something I could let others, a way I could let others shine. And the elderly guests were like in this, having a delicious spaghetti dinner. We had an accordion music player, and then we hired a DJ, and the teens were serving the guests. Everything was coming together just right. And then, well, sorry. Can you see that? Well, what had ended up happening was there were tornado warnings. Everybody's phones were starting to go off. And suddenly everything sort of changed. Now, my golden ball was this big baby of mine, this Young at Heart Senior Prom fundraiser. And I knew that we were probably going to have to ask people to move to the basement and of the church. I literally did not want to step forward. I would prefer to sort of stay hidden and be behind the scenes and let the dancing and conviviality happen, and to continue. But I would monitor things and control it from behind. But there was no one else really that was going to do it. In fact, I, just like in fairy tales, I had asked three different people, hey, what do you think we should do? Do you think you want to make an announcement? I mean, I'm the one in charge here, and I'm like abdicating my power. All three people were like, I'm not doing, no. Well, it was getting to a point where they needed to either, go get in the basement, or the tornado was coming because there was a tornado close by. And then that moment kept coming back to me because it was not graceful. It wasn't planned. It felt very inconvenient for me and even a little unwanted. I would say like a frog moment. Now, not because I'm incapable, but because that version of me felt like it was exposed. It was demanding. It felt like I was becoming my mother, and it was a little uncomfortable for me to own. That was my frog. And here's the important, I think, correlation. I did not fail by wanting to avoid it. Really, I would have missed something really important had I avoided it. If I had stayed in avoidance, I didn't. I did make the call. I went to each table and told them that they need to get in the basement. I overrode their resistance, which was hard. I held the authority in that tense moment. And then we all went downstairs, and then I recreated the order and the morale down there by bringing the music. And then, of course, the bartender brought the wine and the beer and, other beverages. But I prefer to be the behind the scenes energy. And what ended up happening was, whoops, I don't know where that other slide is, but it's here somewhere. What I had to turn into was I had to turn into somebody who was sort of in charge. And that was uncomfortable. So basically, the storm, I look at it as the disruption, the unconscious breaking through. And then the golden ball, of course, was my loss of control of the big event. And then my frog moment, I needed to step forward and be an authority. And believe me, I did not want to do that.
Thanks for sharing, Maureen. Anybody else would want to share any story about losing the golden ball or encounter of a frog?
I don't have as elaborate of an example, but I was doing a presentation, Klara and Maureen, you know how much I love scribbles. And I'm still not comfortable presenting or being online. And so it's not that any bad moment happened. I'm just really aware that the frog part of me was really just nailing me with negative chatter. And I've had a couple of moments. I did my first drum circle and I was the leader. And someone attended that wasn't registered, and he definitely looked like he had some experience. He had his own case, and it's all very formal. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is my first time. Frog moment popped out. It went fine, but I just was like, oh goodness, I don't know what I'm doing. So that's what I can relate it to. But that's a wonderful example, Maureen.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the frog sometimes can just be my disowned authority, and it's safer, sometimes a safer place to be is the competent orchestrator behind the scenes. But you were the leader of the drum circle and the scribbles class. And sometimes, too, it's easier to step back and let stronger personalities take the lead. It's safer. So, identifying that frog moment for me was sort of, you know, after I this had happened and I knew we were doing this fairy tale, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this makes sense. Clara, you had asked about the golden ball. Does anybody have, maybe you could identify a frog moment by looking at a golden ball, something that, you were really attached to that you ended up having to drop.
Well, I know that for me, I remember moving from Illinois, from Chicago to Ohio. Um, that was like losing my golden ball because lots of friends and roots in Chicago and all that had to be left behind. And so that felt like kind of losing that golden ball. And that kind of initiated um, my own journey and task to retrieve it. So that like just the move was I realized like how much I was attached just to the city itself and how much that carried my own identity. And so moving meant to lose that identity. And so it had triggered a lot of new emotions that came up. So that would be like my moment of losing a golden ball. Well,
Well,
just like for the princess, right? Like she loses the golden ball, and it triggers all a series of events. that are leading to her transformation. Now, I want to ask everybody, what do you think about the frog? Just the frog's behavior. Frog is kind of pleading and just wants to be next to her. It seems kind of like very dependent on and just want like real connection. Regardless of if the prince is liking it or not. What do you think about that? Anybody has any thoughts about that?
Surely some of you have had frogs in your life that you've had to share a meal with, or maybe even a bed. Not literally, but so the frog, Clara, would be what? Like what you aren't owning? How would you describe that?
So to me, because it's in an animal form, so that would point to something primal, something instinctive that the ego wants to reject and wants to avoid. But just as if any of you try to avoid your instincts or some qualities that you just, it's so repulsive, you don't want to deal with it. Jung had the idea that these parts of us, qualities, aspects of us, they don't disappear. What happens is that if you reject them, if the ego say, no, I am not like that. No, you're too slimy. No, I don't want to deal with you. You're just too clingy and needy. I don't want you. Well, guess what? Just like the frog kept knocking on the door, those qualities, they may be repressed out of your own consciousness. However, they go into the depth of the unconscious, and that's where they grow their own autonomy. And so that's the shadow, and the shadow waits for the ego to loosen its boundary. And that could mean that you're tired, you didn't get good enough sleep, you're hungry, you're somewhat stressed, or even if you, let's say, if you drink or you take some other substance, then the boundary loosens and all the repressed material from the unconscious can emerge. And so it can look like, let's say, if you know a person that you would say, oh, that's the nicest person that I've ever met. And suddenly that person just has this raging moment where they just scream. And then after they're like, I don't know what came over me. I don't know what happened to me. Well, that's the frog kind of demanding to be seen, demanding a relationship, and demanding your attention, just like the frog. And so then the story tells us that if you tend, well, this version of the story, if you tend to it, if you create a relationship to it, that's when the transformation can happen. And so for the princess with this version, what kind of
I have a slide up right now showing her slapping the frog against the castle wall, Clara. I think that's
we're doing okay. Well, I was gonna do the throwing in the other version. This is just the tending. This is the sleeping on the pillow and
okay, I get
dining,
that part.
and that's when the frog transforms. So it's one way of integrating the shadow, that you are you make friends with it and you want to see what it wants to show you. And so with for the princess right now, it was the endurance of something very repulsive and not running away from it, stepping into it, kind of similar like what Maureen that you shared, that you did not run away from your self agency, from your self authority. You stepped into it, and that made the transformation happen. And so not running away and sticking to something, that would be the masculine part within the female psyche. Now, I'm just going to probably blow your mind now with the fact that Jung recognized that for a woman, her unconscious has masculine quality. not to be mistaken with the gender, but masculine meaning it has actions, it's capable of setting boundaries. And for a male, his unconscious has feminine qualities. Again, and not to be taken as a woman, but more so as the receptive, more that emotional state. And so for the princess, it was when she endured the slimy, repulsive frog, she connected with her own masculine quality, and then the prince transformed. Now, Maureen, do you want to put the slide up when she just like slams the frog
Yeah.
against the wall?
Yes, but before I do that, I do want to make a comment. I have the slide up where the king, what he's doing, see, the princess was trying to weasel out of her promise, and that was like the ego denial. But the king, now, if we look at this literally, you think, well, what kind of king is going to make his daughter sleep with a frog, or eat with a frog? Really, that's the animus, the male part of her psyche. And what's happening is it basically the king is the conscious order and it enforces, it's the final act. Now, that also could be the same thing as throwing the frog against the wall, which is the raw emotion. It's not gentle acceptance. Now, she wasn't really happy about being reminded of that, but in here, it's sort of like a violent passion that's happening, and that's really what liberates the frog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so for women, this fairy tale is about the initiation, about being capable of assert herself and to set boundaries, trusting her inner voice and being capable, keeping the connection balance, well, actually balancing the connection and empowerment at the same time. So that's the story from the female perspective, the Frog Prince. Now, it's important to remember that the frog or the prince was enchanted by a witch. Does anybody have any thoughts? What would be the symbolism around the enchantment?
I don't know if I've ever been enchanted by a witch, but I've been enchanted by maybe a warlock.
What the fairy tales are talking about is that the enchantment typically happens in early stage of development when we're kids, meaning that we are taking on spells from our parents. And so for the prince would be his own, well, the witch would be, it's not obviously a good queen. So we could say it was the negative mother complex that enchanted the prince, that cast the spell and changed the human form into a frog. So how does that look like? If you remember, the frog was very needy and clingy. And so that those instincts kind of like never really developed. That part of the male psyche was never allowed for the proper connection. Now we can speculate what would be, how would it look like in modern life? The mother could have been either neglecting or overbearing, just being just too much. Prince gets enchanted into a frog, and as you remember at the end of the story, there's his faithful servant Henry, and so Henry represents the other side of the same wound, if you will, or the wound meaning that something happens in the early development causing by a parent, and so the psyche creates its own protective mechanism. This is the way I will get my needs met, by being clingy, dependent, and just needy. or the other way around. I will protect myself from this pain. And as you remember, Henry had these iron bands around his chest. So it's kind of containing the pain, containing the emotions. So the on one side is the primitive and instinctual way to connect or to get the needs met, and on the other side is the opposite, is contained, but it's cold, it's protecting against the emotional. And so for the prince to transform back into his human form, he needs to meet his princess who will tend to him, who will accept those primitive sides of him, and that's how he get transformed. And once those parts, the frog matures into, it's almost like upgrades into a human form, then the protective mechanism in form of his faithful servant Henry can pop. And that's why all these bands started to pop one after another. So and if you notice, he doesn't disappear. It's always going to be there, but it doesn't have to be on guard. It can just be the one who is now joyful because his master actually is transformed back into a human form.
That was really cool, Clara, because what you just did was you described the split in the psyche and the adaptations of the same particular wound, which is pretty darn cool. That was pretty slick of you.
I can be slick.
So the frog carried the longing and Henry carried the endurance.
Yes.
That is beautiful. And why do they need each other? The
Why
man,
do they?
well, if a man identifies only with the frog, he becomes emotionally dependent. And then he'll seek to be rescued and validating and merging. And so that's why he was all clingy. If he identifies only with Henry, he becomes stoic. He shuts down and he's incapable of like intimacy and vulnerability. So, boy, I this is deep. I hope we didn't lose anybody.
Questions about this, what we just talked about?
I'm going to stop the screen sharing. I'll see if there's any comments here in the I don't know. I really enjoyed this. I just think like the fairy tales work deep in the psyche. When it's like, why do we read them to children? Because their psyches will, it's like problem solving. They're not going to consciously figure the problem out, but their psyches will work on it. And eventually they will figure the problem out. And keeping it very simple. And isn't it funny though, like in a fairy tale, like nobody ever says, frogs can't talk. Why is that frog talking? Nobody ever says that. Or why is the princess, my goodness, she's a princess and all she has is a golden ball. She's like, must be a pretty special golden ball. Nobody asks those questions.
Yeah. But so there's a thought that actual fairy tales originated as dreams, because just think about your dream, and in your dreams you have talking animals and you have all kinds of creatures in your dreams. I mean, the imagination and anything is possible in a dream. And so if you think about it, the fairy tale kind of mimics also the dream. It always has a certain setting, right? Once upon a time, and it gives you, there was a kingdom, let's say there was a king with three sons, and so, but there's no queen. So now we know that there's some missing aspect in order to become whole. The feminine is missing. And so then there's a quest because the king is dying and they have to find themselves a bride. So again, it sets the premise, then it's the drama, the middle, and then at the end, it's the medicine, it's the resolution. And so if you notice, typically in any fairy tale, the fairy tale ends with a wedding. And so again, the wedding in fairy tales is a symbolism of the wholeness. It's the symbolism of the feminine and masculine balancing each other and coming together in union. It's not really about either prince rescuing the princess, and without the princess could not be rescued. No, it's about the princess or a prince connecting with their own opposite or connecting with the qualities they did not know that they have, like bravery, courage, or facing their fears, or they had to slay a dragon in order to get to the gold. So again, there's a lot of golden symbolism all over fairy tales and even in dreams. I would like to ask you, I have a question for you. What one frog in your life is asking to be invited in? What is knocking at the king's palace and is waiting for you to be let in to dine with you and is asking for your attention? And I can tell you, most of the time, those knocks are not very loud. You can feel them in a form of a subtle nudge, or maybe in a form of a bodily sensation, or like a gut feeling. It's not necessarily something that is known to you, because obviously, if it was known to you, would do it. But just let that settle with you. Just contemplate on it. What one's in. Like, I know that recently I was exposed to a tremendous fear, and so I too just wanted to plead and just promise the frog that if the frog catches my golden ball, I'll do anything. But I was forced not to regress into my old way of taking care of the fear, meaning running away. I had to endure it. I had to sit with it. That fear was my frog that I had to invite it in. And it sat with me for a couple of months. And it was very uncomfortable. But then at the end of, I don't know, probably those 2 months, guess what? Next to me, there was Prince Charming, Prince Hottie, right there. Uh, it really truly transformed, and I'm joking, obviously, but it was in a form that I got the confidence and discovery of a quality within me that I can endure the situation. And once I did it, my Prince Charming was in a form of opening a different source of, or a different spectrum of resources. They were blocked to me because of the fear, because I still wanted to not to keep the promise. I wanted the ball back, but I did not want that frog.
Right. The shadow and the unconscious demand relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating sometimes because it's going to keep knocking. If we don't face, like, what is that you have on your, every time you send an email out, Klara, it's a Carl Jung quote.
We cannot change anything until we accept it.
The way the psyche works is this. If there's things that need to be worked out, problems you have, if you don't make them unconscious and try, or if you don't make them conscious and try to understand them, your psyche is going to bring material and situations and things as a way of healing it unconsciously, because it doesn't care how it gets healed. It's just going to heal it. I would rather be conscious of the stuff that I have come coming at me. I was pretty conscious of that tornado. I knew it was coming. It didn't hit, by the way. In fact, the meatballs were all gone. They didn't survive from the spaghetti. But everybody had a blast at that down in the basement. Who would have thought in old church pews? And my grandson was there, and he found an old drum set, and he's drumming away, and then a basketball, and it music, and we even gave out the best dancer award down there. So it worked out. It wasn't as glamorous as I had envisioned it, but it was legendary.
I love that. Any takeaway from our tea time hour together?
And by the way, Clara, I learned that the Frog Prince story in the Grimm's brothers, and Carl Jung spoke about it, and he would put that particular fairy tale at the forefront of all of them because it really covers an awful lot of aspects.
It's very layered for sure.
I want to say something that I learned that I loved that Clara said about the enchantment on the prince being what we kind of took in as kids or how whenever like that blew my mind because I had no answer for that. I'm like, I don't know, what does that mean? And it made so much sense. So I just thank you for that. That was
Good.
awesome. That's a takeaway for me for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Betsy. Kathy?
Whenever you send the link to watch it again, I'm going to watch this again. But I think it's, of course, I have a theme about claiming some gold, but also the ugly prince, or the ugly the frog, and being more conscious about recognizing when I'm having a frog moment. And then go do something to reground myself. I don't have to listen to the frog moment chatter, right? So this was very lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Anybody else? Brian?
I'll say, I'm just listening, but it's one of the same points, like the longing and the endurance. You need something to work towards. You need something and whatever charge you need to work towards that's your unconscious awareness that gives that charge, or at least maybe there's a other unconscious or subconscious awareness that gives that charge to work towards that thing. I like how it was like the longing and the endurance, and it's primitive, and it's just natural. Like there's nothing to judge about it. There's nothing to judge about the down and dirty and like the most ethereal aspects of ourselves and connecting that to others as well.
Thanks, Ryan. With the longing and endurance, we can look at it that the strategy, let's say for a person that's dominated by the frog, can be that they're staying in the feeling, or if they're in the strategy, if they're staying in Henry, it's they're shutting the feeling down. Then the state for the frog is regressed and is needy, as we said, and then for Henry is controlled and armored. And if someone is dominated by the frog, the way they relate to pain, they're just exposed to it, and Henry contains it. And the way that when this is obviously in the men, when the way they relate then to the feminine is that they're just seeking it desperately in the form of a frog, and Henry just withholds and protects. They are kind of like together, they're forming this compensatory system within the psyche. Just wanted to add that, but
well, one last thing, I think one of the discussion prompts we had would be, what does marrying a frog look like in daily life? And how might embracing our shadow turn something repulsive into something royal? And for me in the story would be, The repulsive part would be for me that, of course, I want recognition. Most humans do. I want to create an impact. I want to matter. I want to be valuable. But then there was another part of me that said, oh, that's too much. That's unattractive. Stay modest and reserved, because that was everything my mother wasn't. I had to kind of enter into that other part because there's gold in that. It's often said we overshoot the runway sometimes when we do that, and we just have to keep doing it until we get comfortable with it. So, yeah.
So if there are no other comments or questions, Maureen and I both would just like you to thank you for being here, spending the evening hour with us. We hope that you enjoy it. If you would be like to be part of these fairy tales session, we would love for you to maybe suggest which fairy tales should we decode next time. That would be great, because we are planning on having these talks on a regular basis. So just if you can shoot us an email, or most of us have our own phone numbers, so like any suggestion would be greatly appreciated.
We don't know it all. Like, you guys could be code crackers too, help us crack the code, and your perceptions, will help shatter our perception a little bit and look at it in a symbolic way or differently. So we would invite that.
Yeah, and it kind of like, even like having these type of talks, that kind of like it starts to cultivate the relationship to the unconscious. And so that's kind of the whole goal of these sessions, to look at the symbolism and kind of get out of, as Stan Groff says, out of the hamburger stand rush hour consciousness, and kind of get into the language of the unconscious, which is symbolic. So that's just our goal with all of this.
So, cheers.
Cheers.
Joining us.
Thank you, ladies, for doing this. This was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks, Betsy. Thank you, everybody, for
Jennifer
joining
says,
us.
sweet dreams.
Yes. Sweet dream, Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.